really good thing. Because that little bit of copper oxide that happens when you put copper in the exposure of the water that you're about to drink actually kills off a lot of bacteria. It's actually a pretty good thing for public health. That's the reason why people use copper. But then a gold miner, the last name of Kennecott, actually failed in a gold mine in Utah. I don't know how many of you actually know the story of the gold rush in California, which is supposed to be the cover story of why Silicon Valley became great and why the West Coast is great and why California is such a great mecca of all great ideas and all that kind of nonsense. Interesting cover story. Kennecott, the actual miner that went to California and then tried to expand out into the other parts of the West Coast of the United States to be a gold miner, actually failed. He couldn't find gold. But he went back to Utah, and in Utah he found a very interesting deposit of copper. He started mining copper, and you know what happened about the same time he started mining copper? A thing called the transatlantic or transcontinental railroad. The transcontinental railroad actually, to be bribed, and by the way, I'm saying bribe because it actually was a bribe, to build the transcontinental railroad, Leland Stanford and a number of others actually got together and petitioned Congress to give them land alongside the railroad. And the harder it was to lay track, the more land they got. It's the largest land grab, private sector land grab in U.S. history. And interestingly enough, they decided that right next to the railroad tracks, they would hang what they called the grapevine. You know what the grapevine was? First transcontinental telegraph line. You know how much copper was worth before that started? It was worthless. It was a lost operation. You know the longest continuously operating mine in the United States? Kennecott Copper Mine. You know the company that is the current owner of Kennecott Copper Mine? Rio Tinto. You know how many of your pension funds here in Europe, and you know how many pension funds in the United States have invested in Rio Tinto? All of them. Guess why you don't ever hear this story? Because of what I'm about to tell you. The reason why we have a 60 hertz addiction is because right now we've actually inextricably linked all of our annuities and our pensions to copper mining. And then we came up with this really great idea in the 1950s and 1960s to actually make sure that all of our public utilities and all our municipalities actually were funded by long-duration bonds. You know what those bonds were? Those were debt instruments. Those debt instruments are the principal instruments that are purchased by people who have to have long fiduciary investments. And those long fiduciary investments are what props up everybody's retirement account. So if you actually ever took the lines down, you'd have to take money from mom and dad, grandpa and grandma. You'd have to take money out from under the pensions. Guess how much of an appetite is for that? How many people would love to see their asset value drop to at least 40% of its present value instantaneously if you ever dropped the utility fee from running the revenue bonds off of that public utility infrastructure? Nobody's ready to take that bill. You think austerity in Greece is bad? Austerity in the United States happens when we actually see Starbucks raise their coffee prices 30 cents. That's our definition of austerity. Right? If we actually saw our pension values drop by 40%, we'd go nuts. We'd have civil war. And guess what? The system knows that. That's why free energy is encouraged to try to fit into a grid. But guess what? If you feed the grid, guess what you've done? Kept the heroin going. Kept the heroin going. It also is supported through commodity speculation. One of the greatest places to make money, particularly now in quantitative trading strategies, is actually to trade on commodities. And metal commodities, particularly commodities that go into the consumer electronics that we all seem to love, actually are phenomenal places for commodity speculation because you can actually do all kinds of currency and commodity value manipulation by spot trading. And it turns out that's a very lucrative trade. Once again, I would say that if you have a pension, or if you are covered by a government pension, or if you have any part of a health care program anywhere in Europe or anywhere in the United States, you're actually participating. Uh-oh. Feels like we're all participating. Colonial conflict and war. You know, the cool thing about colonial conflict and war is we actually don't have to think about it because it happens in remote places. One of the great things about genocide is if it doesn't happen in your backyard, it doesn't really happen. It's amazing. We just think that it's somebody else's problem. And since we never really knew that somebody else, whose problem really is it? Right? If our ringtones of all of our cell phones came with the screams of raped women who are being raped by their 14-year-old sons in conflict metal areas, how many of us would love to have our ringtone go off in a public meeting? Not a single one of us would do that. But you know why you don't hear those cries? You know why you don't hear them? Because you've decided to tune them out. Not because they don't happen. So what else have we done? We've decided to surrogate. We justify all this because what we do with the technology is obviously superior. We never for a moment stop and ask, at what price? And in a second, I'm going to show you the price. This is Bougainville copper. I want you to pause for a minute because I need the picture to speak for a moment. I want you to meet somebody. First I want you to meet is the gentleman who's holding my hand. That gentleman and that particular picture on that particular day is the first time an individual who's been classified by the United States and by Europe as a warlord ever was seen touching a person of Caucasian descent without killing them. That's the first person. And I'd like you to actually know that and then read the quote. It was posthumously written in honor of Thomas Edison. And I'd like you to just juxtapose those in your head for a minute. I don't want to read it. I want you to read it. And then I want you to ask yourself, every time you go to the refrigerator, and you know that the refrigerator is powered by a compressor coil, and that compressor coil is comprised of a whole bunch of wound copper. I want you to ask yourself, whatever you took out of the refrigerator, was it actually worth 20,000 lives that were killed in a civil war in 1989 that none of you saw on the front pages of your papers? Because after all, this was an island in the Pacific. Most anthropologists would say it only had been inhabited for 40,000 years of continuous habitation. Only 40,000 years. Civilization, only 40,000 years of continuous habitation. Where 50% of the island's population was killed in 12 months, funded by your pensions. See, when you put it that way, it stops feeling like free energy is the problem. It starts feeling like we've actually been deluded to believe that that's the problem, to distract us from what the problem is. The problem is our belief that somehow or another we can morally justify that this copper here, which by the way, has a funny story. I actually said to the guys who were defending the warlord, that warlord that was so scary, I said to him, you know what would be a great picture? Would be if you unloaded your clips and let me photograph your bullets with hibiscus flowers. By the way, the most beautiful picture of copper ever out of Bougainville is this picture right here. That is magic. And that's not theoretical magic, by the way, that's actual magic. When you start 30 minutes earlier with an AK-47 gun barrel in your chest, being told you're going to die, and you realize that the power of truth and the power of conviction actually melts the iron of a gun barrel, so much so that 30 minutes later, the bullets that were in the clip are now not pointed at you, but they're actually out of the clip, and they're sitting next to hibiscus flowers, that, ladies and gentlemen, is the power that we're looking for. That's the power we're looking for. And guess what happened when I actually shot a video, which you can get off of my blog, Inverted Alchemy, and the name Inverted Alchemy is not by accident. Inverted Alchemy is a gift to me from a 4-year-old girl who visited me in a dream wearing white. And that 4-year-old girl actually showed me through all of time every alchemist and everything that every alchemist had tried to do, how to transform something into something of greater value. And the 4-year-old girl in my dream asked me at the end of my dream, when are we going to start turning gold back into humanity? Don't tell me about free energy. Don't tell me about politics. Don't tell me about economies. Ask that 4-year-old girl's question, and then find out where you're answering it. Because it turns out that along that pathway, you find some really interesting things. It turns out when you stop seeing yourself as merely the victim of a system, where the debt and currencies are just too big to take on, and where the imperial structures that we've lived with are just too big to take on, and when all of these things are so overwhelming that it's just easier for me to come to a conference and check the box and say, at least I came, at least I thought about this for a weekend. When I get past that, I actually realize that I'm not unempowered at all. I'm unplugged. And you know what's funny when you're unplugged? You can actually walk into a gun barrel, and the gun barrel actually melts when it comes in contact with your chest. Do you know why? Because a gun barrel works to intimidate. But when it stops working to intimidate, it becomes powerless. Because guess what you can't take? You can't take something that's not yours to give. How many times did I hear from Rio Tinto shareholders, you should fear for your life? Interesting proposition, because I don't accept your opening premise. I hope that wasn't too complicated for some of you to get. You can't take what I don't have to give.